Every culture on Earth tells the same story. It is a story of a great flood, a world ending in water and beginning again. These global flood legends are humanity's oldest and most persistent memory of catastrophe and renewal. By the end of this journey, you will understand why this single narrative echoes across every continent and what it reveals about our deepest fears and hopes. We will explore ancient tablets from Mesopotamia, sacred texts from India, and oral traditions from the Americas, uncovering a shared blueprint hidden within them all. How is it possible that civilizations separated by vast oceans and thousands of years all describe the same cataclysmic event? This is more than a study of myth. It is a search for the roots of our collective psyche. What does our oldest story say about our need for a second chance? The sky turns the color of bruised iron, and a deep, unsettling rumble rises from the very bones of the earth. This is the moment before the end, a scene etched into the foundational memory of cultures across the globe. From the icy north to the sweltering tropics, our oldest stories describe a primordial cataclysm, a deluge of such immense scale that it wiped the world clean. This is not merely a tale of bad weather. It is depicted as a fundamental reset, a violent cleansing of the old world to make way for the new. The sheer consistency of this narrative suggests it may be rooted in a real, shared trauma, a catastrophic event so profound it scarred the human psyche forever. What could have caused such a universal fear? Researchers point to clues locked in the planet itself. At the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, vast ice sheets melted, causing sea levels to rise hundreds of feet and swallowing immense stretches of coastline. Imagine entire continents shrinking, ancient homelands vanishing forever beneath the waves in a geological blink of an eye. Others theorize about a massive comet impact or a period of intense volcanic activity, events that could have triggered worldwide floods and climate chaos. These are not just stories of water, but stories of survival. They speak to a deep-seated understanding that sometimes, for life to begin anew, the old world must be utterly destroyed. Why would a farmer in ancient India, a tribesman in the Australian outback, and a king in Mesopotamia all tell versions of the same specific story? The answer may lie with the first civilization to ever write it down. The oldest written account of the Great Flood was pressed into damp clay over 4,000 years ago in the heart of Mesopotamia. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, a king's desperate search for immortality leads him to a distant, blessed man named Utnapishtim. This man, the sole survivor of the god's wrath, recounts a terrifying story. The divine council, led by the god Enlil, had grown weary of humanity's noise and decided to wipe them from the earth. But one god, E, took pity. He whispered a warning to Utnapishtim through the walls of his reed house, instructing him to build a great, cube-shaped vessel. The instructions were precise, down to the boat's dimensions and the application of bitumen to make it watertight. Utnapishtim was to tell his curious neighbors that he was building it because the god Enlil had rejected him, and he must leave, a clever ruse to conceal the true, impending doom. He loaded the massive boat with his family, various craftsmen, and the seed of all living creatures. Then the storm came. For 6 days and 7 nights, a tempest raged so fiercely that even the gods themselves cowered in fear, regretting their decision. On the 7th day, the sea grew calm, and Utnapishtim's boat came to rest on a mountain. He released a dove which circled and returned, finding no place to land. Then a swallow which also came back. Finally, he released a raven which did not return, signaling that the waters had receded and the earth was green once more. Utnapishtim then made a sacrifice to the gods, and the sweet smell of the offering drew them near. Enlil, initially enraged to find survivors, was placated and granted Utnapishtim and his wife the gift of eternal life. Here, in this ancient text, we find the complete blueprint, a story of divine judgment, a warning, a vessel of salvation, and the test for dry land that would be replicated for millennia. This is the foundational layer of the global flood myth, yet it is only the beginning of a story that would travel far beyond these river valleys. Centuries later, and hundreds of miles to the west, the Mesopotamian blueprint was refined and given a powerful new meaning. In the book of Genesis, the story of Noah transforms the flood from an act of divine annoyance into one of moral judgment. Here, God sees that the wickedness of humanity has filled the earth with violence and corruption. But one man, Noah, finds favor for his righteousness. The divine instruction is direct and detailed. He is commanded to build an ark of gopher wood, to make rooms within it and coat it inside and out with pitch. The dimensions are staggering: a vessel 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, a massive floating refuge designed for a very specific cargo. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons and their wives, and a pair of every kind of living creature, male and female, are to be brought aboard to preserve life itself. For 40 days and 40 nights, the fountains of the great deep burst forth and the floodgates of the heavens are opened. The water prevails upon the earth for 150 days, wiping away every living thing that breathed on dry land. Finally, the ark comes to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Noah sends out a raven and then a dove. The dove returns the first time, finding no rest. After 7 days, he sends it again, and it returns with a freshly plucked olive leaf. The third time, it does not return at all, a signal that the earth is reborn. Noah builds an altar and makes a sacrifice, and here the story introduces a concept absent from its Mesopotamian predecessor, a covenant. God places his bow in the clouds as a sign of this everlasting promise, a vow to never again destroy all life with a flood. This symbol, the rainbow, transforms the narrative from a simple tale of survival into a profound statement about divine mercy and a fresh start for a moral universe. This version, so central to Western civilization, is a powerful echo of an older story, yet it stands as just one pillar in a global structure. To see how universal this memory truly is, we must journey to the other side of the world, to a land of ancient rivers and towering peaks where a similar cataclysm was recorded. Across the world, in the ancient river basins of India, the memory of the flood takes a uniquely mystical turn. The story of Manu, preserved in texts like the Satapatha Brahmana, begins not with divine anger, but with a simple act of kindness. A tiny fish approaches the pious Manu, pleading for protection from larger predators. Moved by compassion, he places it in a small jar, but the fish grows with astonishing speed, quickly outgrowing the jar, then a pond, then the mighty Ganges River itself. Realizing this is no ordinary creature, Manu finally carries it to the ocean. It is then that the great fish reveals its true identity. It is an avatar of the preserver god, Vishnu. In gratitude for Manu's protection, Vishnu now offers a warning in return. A great deluge is coming, he declares, a cosmic dissolution that will sweep away all corrupt and stagnant life. He instructs Manu to build a massive, sturdy ship and to gather within it the seeds of every plant and a pair of every living creature. When the terrifying rains begin and the oceans rise to swallow the land, Manu does as he was told. The great fish reappears, and Manu secures his ship to its single, immense horn using Vasuki, the king of serpents, as a rope. Across the raging, world-covering waters, Vishnu, in his piscine form, guides the vessel safely. He does not merely float aimlessly, he is actively towed to the peak of a mountain called Norbandhana, the highest point in a drowned world where it rests until the flood subsides. This version presents a fundamentally different relationship between the divine and humanity. The flood is not a punishment for noise or violence, but a necessary, cyclical renewal of the cosmos. The Savior is not a God who regrets his decision, but a guiding protector who rewards a specific virtue, compassion for a seemingly insignificant life. Monu's survival ensures the world can be repopulated, not just with people, but with all its biological and spiritual diversity. This Eastern perspective enriches the global story, showing that the flood was remembered not only as an act of judgment, but also as an act of preservation. From the vast continents, our search now turns to the most isolated places on Earth, the scattered islands of the Pacific, where the ocean itself is the central character of existence. How did these cultures, born from the sea, interpret a story of the world being drowned by it? The story of a world erased by water echoes just as powerfully in the sun-drenched lands of ancient Greece. There, the poet Hesiod told of a time when Zeus, father of the gods, looked down upon the Bronze Age of humanity and saw only arrogance and violence. Disgusted by their hubris, he resolved to wash the entire world clean. But the clever Titan Prometheus, who had always favored mankind, could not stand idly by. He whispered a warning to his mortal son, a righteous man named Deucalion. Acting on this divine tip, Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha have built a great chest, stocked it with provisions, and sealed themselves inside just as the skies opened. For 9 days and 9 nights, a torrential flood scoured the land, drowning every city and every soul until their lone vessel came to rest on the slopes of Mount Parnassus. They stepped out into a silence more profound than any they had ever known, a world utterly empty of other people. Desperate for guidance, they sought an oracle who gave them a seemingly monstrous command. They were to throw the bones of their great mother behind them. Deucalion, with brilliant insight, understood the riddle. Their great mother was Gaia, the earth herself, and her bones were the stones that lay upon the ground. And so they did, walking away from the temple and casting stones over their shoulders without looking back. A miracle then unfolded. The stones thrown by Deucalion softened and grew, taking the form of men, while those cast by Pyrrha blossomed into women. This was not a simple repopulation. It was a literal recreation of humanity sprung directly from the body of the planet. This Greek twist transforms the flood from a mere punishment into a profound rebirth, where the stones themselves held the latent potential for a new and hopefully more humble human race. This creative act of renewal from the Earth's own substance makes you wonder how cultures across the Atlantic, entirely disconnected from the Mediterranean world, conceived of their own world-ending deluges. Across the Atlantic, the Aztecs understood the world through a rhythm of cosmic collapse and rebirth. They believed our current era is merely the fifth sun, preceded by 4 others that each met a violent end. The era immediately before our own was the 4th sun, known as the Sun of Water. This was a time of abundance and growth, but it was destined for a terrible conclusion. The sky itself, they said, shattered, and the waters of the heavens poured through, flooding the entire world and drowning all of humanity. Yet this was not a random act of destruction. It was a necessary part of a divine schedule, the closing of one chapter to make room for the next. The Aztec account offers a fascinating twist on the theme of survival. Instead of a single great boat, the gods chose a more direct form of salvation. They transformed the people of that age into fish, allowing them to live on within the very element that was destroying their world. But 2 humans remained in their original form, a man named Coxcoxtli and a woman named Xochiquetzal. Forewarned of the deluge, they did not build an ark, they sought refuge inside a massive, hollow cypress tree. As the waters rose to swallow the mountains, this great tree became their sealed vessel, bobbing on the primordial sea until the flood finally receded. When they emerged, they found themselves alone in a silent, muddy world. It was their duty to repopulate the earth, to become the ancestors of the age that would follow. The story of the fourth son frames the flood not as a singular punishment, but as one inevitable event in an endless cycle. The transformation into fish and the salvation found within a living tree are powerful symbols of adaptation and the enduring life force, even in the face of total annihilation. This cyclical view of history, where destruction is a prelude to creation, resonates deeply with other indigenous traditions. Far to the north, along the rugged northwest coast of America, another ancient people told of a flood that changed the world forever. High in the thin air of the Andes, the Incas told of a world turned upside down by water. Their legend of Yunu Pachacuti translates to a time when the world was overturned, a cataclysm sent by the creator god Viracocha. Displeased with his first creation, a race of unruly giants who disrupted the cosmic order, Viracocha unleashed a deluge from the heavens. The mountains shook, and the oceans rose to swallow the land, scouring the world clean of these colossal, flawed beings. Yet, in this act of divine judgment, a sliver of hope remained. Two humans, a man and a woman, were spared by fleeing to the safety of a towering peak. They huddled there, watching the waters churn below as the old world drowned and a new one was prepared. From these two survivors, a new and more virtuous humanity was born, a people destined to be the ancestors of the Inca themselves. This was not just a story of survival, it was a story of purpose. The Incan Empire's divine right to rule was rooted in this very event, positioning them as the direct descendants of those chosen to repopulate a purified earth. The legend also served as a powerful explanation for the giant fossil bones eroding from the hillsides, which they interpreted as the remains of the drowned giants from the age before the flood. This myth is etched into the Andean landscape itself, a region where geological evidence points to massive prehistoric floods and dramatic uplifts of the earth. The story of Yunu Pachacuti presents a clear vision of progressive renewal, where a flawed creation is washed away to make room for a better one, a cycle of improvement written into the very mountains. This deep connection between myth and mountain is a thread that leads us across the widest ocean, to islands where the sea is not a destroyer but an ancestor. The land itself remembers the flood. In the Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime, the Great Flood is not a distant, forgotten event but a living presence etched into the contours of the earth. For the Gunditjmara people of what is now Victoria, the story is told through the volcano Budgebim. They speak of a time when the ancestral being, manifested as the mountain itself, awoke in fury. It erupted, spewing fire and lava, but this was followed by a great deluge of water that flooded the lowlands. This was not mere destruction, it was a moment of profound creation. The rushing waters carved out entirely new landscapes, forming the intricate network of lakes and waterways that define the region to this day. This narrative explains the very world the Gunditjmara live in, a world shaped by that primordial event. Other traditions tell of great ancestral serpents or other beings who caused floods to carve out riverbeds, fill waterholes, or cleanse the land of those who broke sacred law. Here, the flood is a dual force, both punitive and profoundly creative. It punishes wrongdoing while simultaneously sculpting the physical and spiritual geography. These stories are far more than simple history. They are the foundation of a living culture, a guide to law, identity, and the proper relationship with the land. Every sacred site, every water source, is a permanent reminder of that ancestral act. This perspective completely reorients our understanding of the global flood memory. It is not just a tale of survival from a catastrophe, but an ongoing dialogue between the people, their ancestors, and a landscape that is itself a testament to the flood's creative power. How does a story become so deeply woven into the fabric of existence that it ceases to be a story and becomes the world itself? This holistic view forces us to see the flood not as a single historical point, but as a continuous, shaping force within a living worldview. In the fertile basin of the Yellow River, the Great Flood was not a sudden act of godly wrath, but a persistent, grinding crisis. For generations, the waters rose, swallowing farmlands and villages in a slow-moving disaster that defined an era. The legend tells not of a single survivor in a boat, but of a hero who would not let his people drown. His name was Yu. When his own father was executed for failing to control the deluge after 9 years of labor, Yu took up the monumental task. He did not build an ark to escape the water, he chose to confront it directly. For 13 long years, he led a colossal public works project, dredging new river channels and canals to guide the torrents back to the sea. He is said to have passed his own home 3 times in those 13 years, hearing the cries of his newborn children, but he never once went inside, so driven was he by his duty to the people. His body became twisted and haggard, his hands and feet calloused and worn from the endless labor. This was a salvation earned not by divine favor alone, but by sheer, unyielding human effort. When the waters finally receded, channeled safely to the ocean, the land was not just saved, it was improved, made more fertile and orderly than before. For this heroic triumph over chaos, Yu was granted the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule, and founded the Xia dynasty. Here, the flood narrative transforms completely. Renewal is not a gift from the gods following a cleansing punishment. It is an active, collective achievement. It is a story that champions governance, perseverance, and the power of human ingenuity to reshape a hostile world. This vision of order wrested from chaos stands in stark contrast to the cataclysmic resets we have seen elsewhere, yet it answers the same fundamental need for a new beginning. How do we reconcile these two powerful models of renewal, one passive and one active? The answer may lie not in the stories themselves, but in the very ground beneath our feet. But before Gilgamesh ever sought out Utnapishtim, there was an even older story whispered in the dust of a dying city. On a broken Sumerian tablet, we find the tale of Ziusudra, the king-priest of the city of Shuruppak. In this fragmentary text, known as the Eridu Genesis, the Divine Council, the Anunnaki, make a collective decision. They resolve to send a flood to silence the ever-growing noise of humanity. Yet one among them, the wise god Enki, cannot abide this total annihilation. Bound by his oath to the council, he cannot directly warn a mortal, so he chooses a clever, indirect path. He speaks to a wall made of reeds, knowing that the devout Ziusudra is listening on the other side. Through this whispered secret, Enki instructs the king to build a great boat, a vast vessel to carry the seed of all living things. Ziusudra does not hesitate. He builds the Salvation Ark as instructed. The storm rages for 7 days and 7 nights, and the great boat is tossed upon the waters until the sun god Utu finally appears, bringing calm. Ziusudra drills a hole in the boat and offers sacrifices to the gods, who gather around the sweet smell like flies. But the conclusion here is profoundly different. In gratitude for his role in preserving life, the gods do not merely let Ziusudra live out his days, they grant him the ultimate gift. They transport him to a faraway land called Dilmun and bestow upon him eternal life. This is the oldest written flood narrative we have, and in it we see the complete genetic code for every version that would follow. The divine conflict, the secret warning, the preservation of life, and the survival of a single righteous man are all present in this primordial telling. Yet the reward is not for a new humanity, but for the hero himself, a personal apotheosis that marks this as a story from the very dawn of legend. Why would this specific plot, this divine disagreement and the salvation of a single family become the most replicated story in human history. The answer may lie not in the water, but in the very structure of how we remember catastrophe. Even the frozen realms of the north knew the world would one day drown. In the stark prophecies of the Norse Eddas, the end times event of Ragnarök unfolds with brutal inevitability. This is not a singular flood sent by an angry deity, but a cataclysm woven into the very fabric of destiny. The great serpent Jörmungandr, who lies coiled in the world-encircling sea, will rise from the depths in a fury, his colossal thrashing whipping the oceans into a frenzy that surges over every coast. The earth itself shudders as the monstrous wolf Fenrir breaks his bonds, and the great world tree Yggdrasil trembles to its roots. In this final, glorious battle, the gods themselves will fall, and the land will not just be flooded, it will sink completely beneath the waves, a total submersion into a primordial void. The Norse vision is one of absolute, uncompromising destruction, where even the divine order is not spared. Yet, this is not the end of the story. From the drowning darkness, a new world emerges, fresh, green, and fertile, rising pure from the water. The sun, daughter of the Old One, shines upon this reborn earth, and from a hidden forest called Hodmamis Holt, two human survivors, Lif and Lithrasir, meaning life and life striver, step forward. They had been sheltered by the tree itself, preserved through the chaos. These two will drink the morning dew and repopulate this pristine world, joined by a new generation of gods who remember the old ones. The flood here is not a punishment, but a necessary, fiery and watery climax to a cosmic cycle. It is a destruction that makes creation possible, a renewal on the grandest metaphysical scale. How does this pattern of total loss leading to pure beginnings appear in cultures with no conceivable contact? We have seen the blueprint from Mesopotamia to the Andes, but the sheer number of these stories demands we ask a more profound question. The cedar forests of the Pacific Northwest hold their own memory of the deluge. Among the Lummi people, a story is told of a time when the human heart grew cold and selfish, turning away from the ways of the Creator. In response, the skies opened and the rains began to fall, not as a passing storm, but as an unending judgment, determined to wash the world clean of its corruption. But one man, attentive to the spirit world, received a warning in a dream. He was instructed to build a great canoe, a vessel for salvation, and he knew he must act swiftly. He did not look for just any wood. He sought out the grandest cedar, a tree that was the very pillar of his people's world, providing them with shelter, clothing, and tools. From this single, massive trunk, he hollowed out a giant canoe, a task that must have seemed both impossible and utterly essential. He gathered his family and then set about collecting a pair of every animal, from the towering elk to the smallest frog, securing them within the wooden ark. As the waters rose, swallowing the valleys and climbing the foothills, the canoe lifted on the swell, a single point of life adrift on a boundless, churning ocean. For days they drifted until at last the vessel grounded solidly on the snowy slopes of a great, white peak the people now call Mount Baker. There, the man released the animals back into a world washed clean, becoming the progenitor of a new and hopefully more righteous people. This legend is a powerful echo of the global pattern, yet it is woven from the very fibers of the Lummi world. The cedar tree is not just wood, it is a sacred gift, and its use as the instrument of salvation roots the cosmic event in the intimate reality of their daily life and landscape. This profound connection between story and place raises a compelling question. If these narratives are merely coincidental folklore, why do they so often include the same intricate sequence of events, a sequence that now spans from the deserts of Mesopotamia to the rainy shores of the Pacific Northwest? For a people born from the ocean, the Great Flood was not an ending but the ultimate voyage. Across the vast expanse of Polynesia, the memory of the deluge is inextricably linked to the canoe, the vessel that was both their home and their hope. In the traditions of the Maori of New Zealand, the cataclysm is known as Te Tai E Ru Hu, a world-engulfing flood often attributed to the god Uamoko, the unborn child of earth and sky whose stirrings cause earthquakes and volcanic fury. When the seas rose to swallow the land, survival did not come from a sealed ark waiting for the waters to recede. It came from skill, courage, and the deep ancestral knowledge of the waves. The heroes of this story, sometimes the great navigator Cuyp or a family of chosen survivors, did not fight the water or seek to drain it away. They did what their people had done for generations. They launched their great waka, their canoe, and they navigated. This was a test of maritime resilience, a journey across a transformed world where the familiar islands were gone, replaced by an endless, challenging sea. Their goal was not simply to stay afloat, but to find a new land, to spot on the horizon the cloud that signified a mountain peak, the promise of a new beginning. In this profound reframing, the flood narrative shifts from a story of divine punishment to one of epic discovery. The renewal it promises is not a return to a purified old world, but the active, courageous founding of a new one. The canoe is not a lifeboat, it is a seed pod carrying the essence of a culture across the primordial waters, ensuring that even in the face of total catastrophe, the journey continues. How many other flood legends are not about waiting for the world to be restored, but about having the courage to build a new one from the waves? This practical, forward-looking perspective brings us to a final, overwhelming question, one that has been building with every story from every corner of the globe. The misty hills of Wales hold their own memory of a world drowned, not by rain from heaven, but by the land itself giving way. In the ancient tales of the Mabinogion, the catastrophe began with the overflowing of a single mythical lake, Llyn Llyn. This was not a divine judgment upon human sin, but a cataclysmic natural event, a sudden and violent breaking of the waters from a specific, legendary source. The lake burst its bounds and a deluge poured forth to engulf the world, a story that feels less like a punishment and more like a geological trauma remembered through generations. From this localized disaster, only two people were prepared, a man and a woman named Dwyfyn and Dwyfach. They had built a remarkable vessel known as the Nefyd Naf Nefian, a name that echoes like the whisper of an ancient shipwright. Within its sturdy hull, they gathered a pair of every living creature, a complete biological archive for a world about to be erased. Theirs was not a long voyage across endless oceans, but a desperate ride on the torrent that poured from the broken lake, a flood that reshaped the very face of the land until their ark came to rest on solid ground in what we now know as Wales. There, Dwyfyn and Dwyfach stepped out onto the damp earth and began the work of repopulating all of Britain. This legend is a profound etiological myth, a story crafted to explain origins. It answers the fundamental questions of a people: where did we come from, and how did this land become ours? The flood is the pivotal event that cleanses the old to make way for the new, directly linking the modern inhabitants to those first two survivors who emerged from the waters. Their deep, ancestral connection to the Welsh landscape is literally born from this flood, blending history, geography, and identity into a single, powerful narrative of beginning. How many other local floods, lost to our history books, were so transformative they became the very foundation of a people's story? In the heart of West Africa, the Man people tell a story where the flood is not an end, but the very beginning. Their creation epic describes a world that was, from the start, a formless and marshy void, a place of pure potential waiting to be shaped. The creator god Mangala held within himself the seeds of a perfect universe, a divine blueprint for order. But his work was constantly thwarted by a rebellious and chaotic spirit, a force of primal disorder that refused to be tamed. This cosmic struggle between creation and chaos could not be sustained, leading to a necessary cataclysmic resolution. Mangala unleashed a great deluge, a purifying wave that did not punish humanity, for there was none yet to punish. Instead, it washed over the primordial swamp, scouring away the stubborn chaos itself. The waters did not destroy a world, they prepared the canvas for one. As the flood receded, the first solid land emerged from the depths, a stable foundation rising from the turbulent waters. And from this new, pure earth, the first ancestors of the man people were formed. Their society, their laws, and their very identity were established on this ground, born directly from the flood's creative act. This is a profound departure from the stories of judgment we have seen. Here, the deluge is the violent but essential moment of separation, the cosmic surgery that cut order away from chaos, allowing for the birth of the world and humanity in a single, dramatic gesture. The flood is not an interruption of history, it is the foundation of existence. How many other cultures remember the water not as an enemy, but as the essential ingredient from which their world was born? The green hills of Ireland hide a sorrow beneath their lakes and along their shores. Here, the flood is not a global catastrophe but a deeply personal tragedy, a story of a single kingdom's hubris and its watery grave. Legends whisper of places like Kilstuithen, a city of marvelous wealth and song that now lies silent under the waves. Its doom was not decreed by a council of gods, but triggered by a simple human failure, the neglect of a sacred well. These wells, guarded by a spirit often called the Lady of the Lake, were the spiritual anchors of the land, and their care was a sacred covenant. When a king or his people grew arrogant, when they forgot the old rites and allowed the well to become choked with debris, the lady's wrath was swift and absolute. She would remove the stone lid, and the waters would not simply flow. They would burst forth in an unstoppable torrent, swallowing the entire prosperous realm in a single, terrible day. This was a punishment for a broken taboo, a direct consequence of failing to honor the delicate balance between humanity and the natural world. In some tellings, a lone survivor escapes the rushing tide, often a woman who embodies the old wisdom or a bard whose duty is to carry the memory of the loss into the future. This survivor becomes a living ghost, haunted by the beauty that was and burdened with the warning for generations to come, and the story does not truly end with the drowning. The sunken lands are never completely lost. On days when the water is perfectly calm, fishermen swear they can see the ghostly outlines of towers and roads far below the surface. Some say that on quiet Sunday mornings, you can hear the faint, melodic ringing of the church bells from Kilstuithen, a spectral chime calling from a golden age forever out of reach. These narratives are powerful cautionary tales, deeply rooted in the Irish landscape. Every lough and bay holds the potential of a hidden history, a mystical past that is both a source of wonder and a solemn reminder. The flood here symbolizes the profound loss of a cultural zenith, a punishment for forgetting tradition, and a permanent scar on the land itself that serves as an eternal lesson against human folly. How many other local tales of sunken cities are not mere fiction, but the preserved memory of a coastline forever changed by a rising sea? Grief can drown the world. In the frozen forests of Finland, the Kalevala epic presents a flood born not from divine anger, but from a broken human heart. The story centers on the tragic hero Kullervo, a man whose life has been a long series of betrayals and sorrows. His final, unbearable anguish comes when he discovers the woman he just seduced is his own long-lost sister. The horror of this unintentional act shatters him completely. He does not curse the gods or rage against fate. He simply weeps. His grief is so vast, so bottomless, that his tears cannot be contained. They overflow from his eyes and begin to pool on the ground. They become a stream, then a river, and finally a deluge that rises to cover the entire world. This is a cataclysm of pure emotion, an internal despair made terrifyingly external. Here, the environment is not a separate entity to be judged or saved. It is a direct extension of the human psyche. In the animistic worldview that underpins this epic, the natural world is alive and responsive, a mirror to our deepest joys and sorrows. Kullervo's personal tragedy does not just happen in the world, it actively remakes the world, reshaping the very landscape through the sheer force of his remorse. This introspective twist reframes the entire concept of a world-ending event. The greatest flood is not always one of water, but one of feeling, a tsunami of shame and regret so powerful it can erase reality itself. How many other ancient stories hold this same truth, that our inner turmoil can ripple outward with world-shattering force? A king who could see the entire world in his cup. This is the power granted to King Jamshid in the great Persian epic, the Shahnameh. For 700 years, his reign was a golden age, a time of perfect order where pain, sickness, and even death were banished. Demons built magnificent palaces, and humanity lived in peace under his benevolent gaze, all thanks to the divine radiance, the fire that shone upon him. But the human heart is a fragile vessel for such power. Jamshid's wisdom slowly curdled into a devastating pride. He began to see himself not as the steward of divine fortune, but as its source. He stood before his people and declared, "I am your God." The moment the words left his lips, the celestial light flickered and vanished. His fire departed from him, leaving only a mortal shell draped in arrogance. The kingdom did not collapse in a single day. It unraveled. The obedient demons turned rebellious, the unified empire splintered into warring factions, and the golden age dissolved into a long, dark age of chaos and strife. This is the Persian flood. No water poured from the skies, no waves swallowed the mountains. Instead, a tide of consequences, born from a single act of hubris, washed away an entire civilization. The world was not cleansed by rain, but purified by ruin, its moral order reset. This metaphorical deluge serves the same function as the great floods of other legends. It clears away a corrupt and stagnant era, making the land fertile for a new seed, a righteous ruler who would emerge from the chaos to reclaim the lost far and begin the cycle anew. From the frozen north to the sunken islands of the Pacific, these stories reveal a pattern so consistent it cannot be ignored. When you line them up side by side, the shared architecture of the flood myth emerges with stunning clarity. The cause is almost always cosmic, a decision from the gods or a necessary cycle of the universe, triggered by human failings like noise, violence, or pride. In every corner of the world, a hero receives a warning, a secret whisper through a reed wall or a dream from an ancestral spirit. This chosen one then builds a vessel, a specific and carefully crafted ark, chest, or canoe, designed not for exploration but for pure preservation. Inside, they gather the essential seeds of life, their own family and pairs of animals, creating a floating microcosm of the world that was. After the storm, the vessel does not land on a beach or in a valley. It consistently comes to rest on a high mountain, the first peak to emerge from the retreating waters, a symbol of a new foundation rising from the chaos. And from that high place, the survivors do not simply go home. They establish a new covenant, a new moral order, or a new people, transforming the event from a mere disaster into a genesis. This is not a list of coincidences. This is a blueprint. These common threads point to something far deeper than shared storytelling tropes. They hint at a foundational archetype, a primal story etched into the collective human mind, a narrative born from our deepest fears of annihilation and our most resilient hope for a second chance. This shared memory speaks to a universal human experience, a trauma and a triumph that every culture, in its own way, needed to remember and pass down. But if this story is so deeply woven into who we are, what does its enduring power truly mean for us today? But what if the Earth itself remembers this great flood? The transition from myth to potential reality begins not in ancient texts, but in the layers of sediment and the contours of the ocean floor. Science cannot confirm a single, planet-spanning deluge as the legends describe, but it has uncovered evidence for catastrophic floods so immense they would have been genuinely world-ending for the people who lived through them. One of the most compelling theories is the Black Sea deluge hypothesis. Imagine a time when the Black Sea was a smaller, isolated freshwater lake, surrounded by fertile shores that supported some of humanity's earliest farming communities. Then, around 7,600 years ago, a natural dam at the Bosporus Strait gave way. The relentless waters of the rising Mediterranean Sea burst through in a thunderous, roaring cascade, a waterfall hundreds of times more powerful than Niagara Falls. This relentless torrent would have poured in for months or even years, swallowing the entire basin, drowning the coastal plains, and forcing a massive, desperate migration of people inland. For those communities, this was not a story. It was the end of their world, a trauma that would have been seared into their collective memory and carried with them as they scattered across Europe and Asia. At the same time, on a much grander scale, the planet was emerging from the last ice age. As the colossal ice sheets retreated, they released unimaginable volumes of meltwater, causing global sea levels to rise by over 300 feet. This was not a sudden event, but a relentless, unstoppable creep that spanned centuries, swallowing vast, inhabited coastal plains forever. One of the most significant of these lost worlds was Doggerland, a sprawling, fertile landmass that once connected Great Britain to mainland Europe. For millennia, it was home to Mesolithic hunter-gatherers who tracked game across its hills and valleys. Then, the seas slowly rose and a final, catastrophic tsunami, likely triggered by an underwater landslide off the coast of Norway, delivered the final blow, inundating the remaining land and turning it into the cold, grey waters of the North Sea. Today, fishermen in the area still occasionally haul up ancient mammoth bones and stone tools in their nets, ghostly relics from a sunken continent. These regional cataclysms provide a powerful scientific foundation for our oldest stories. A single, devastating local flood, experienced by a migrating population, could have been the seed. As the story was told and retold over generations, carried along trade routes and across continents, the memory of one valley's destruction could have slowly expanded to become the story of the entire world drowning. The myths are not literal history, but they may be the deeply human, amplified echo of real geological trauma, a way to make sense of an event so terrible it felt like the end of everything. The floodwaters may have receded from the land, but they remain a powerful force within the human mind. Carl Jung, the pioneering psychologist, would argue that these stories persist not because they all record a single historical disaster, but because they tap into something far deeper, a layer of our shared psyche he called the collective unconscious. Within this foundational mind exist archetypes, universal patterns and symbols that shape our dreams, our myths, and our understanding of the world. The Great Flood is one of the most potent of these archetypes. In this psychological lens, the deluge represents the unconscious itself, a vast, chaotic, and potentially destructive ocean of memories, instincts, and emotions that lies beneath our waking awareness. It is the part of us that can feel alien and terrifying, a force that can erupt without warning and wash away the orderly structures of our conscious lives. The hero who builds the ark, then, is not just a figure from legend but a symbol of the conscious ego, that part of our identity that says I. Faced with an overwhelming psychic storm, the ego must construct a vessel, a defined sense of self to stay afloat. This is the fragile container of our sanity, our personal identity, navigating the tumultuous seas of our inner world. The careful gathering of animals into the ark mirrors the ego's task of integrating the diverse and often wild instincts of our nature, the parts of ourselves we might otherwise ignore or suppress. The entire narrative arc, from the catastrophic eruption to the secure containment and final emergence onto a renewed landscape, maps perfectly onto the process of profound psychological transformation. This is the journey of death and rebirth of the self. We must often allow an old, rigid, or dysfunctional part of our personality to be shattered, to be flooded and dissolved, before we can build a new, more resilient identity. The mountain where the ark comes to rest is the achievement of a higher state of consciousness, a new perspective gained only after navigating the depths. This is why the flood myth echoes in every culture. It is not a memory of water, but a blueprint for the soul's journey. It resonates because every human being at some point experiences an inner catastrophe, a feeling of being overwhelmed by forces beyond their control. And every recovery, every time we rebuild ourselves after a personal crisis, we are unconsciously reenacting this oldest of stories, finding our own ark and sailing toward our own mountain of renewal. The ancient fear of a world erased by water has not faded with time. It has simply found a new vessel. Our modern cinemas and novels have become the new temples for this primordial story, proving the flood archetype is as powerful today as it was on those Sumerian tablets. In the stark allegory of Jean Genot's The Man Who Planted Trees, we see a different kind of deluge, a slow-moving catastrophe of the human spirit. A solitary shepherd, Elzayat Bouffier, witnesses a land dying from a flood of despair, a spiritual drought that has left the earth barren and the people broken. His response is not to build an ark of wood, but an ark of life itself. Through decades of patient labor, he plants acorn after acorn, creating a forest that gradually calls back the rain, refills the streams, and restores hope to the villages. This is a flood narrative in reverse, where one man's quiet perseverance holds back the tide of ecological and social collapse, offering a modern parable of renewal through stewardship rather than mere survival. The flood here is the creeping ruin we bring upon ourselves, and the ark is the simple, profound act of planting a tree. Yet for every subtle allegory, there is a spectacle that brings the cataclysm to visceral life. Blockbuster films like 2012 depict the flood with all the technological fury our era can muster, translating divine wrath into solar flares and collapsing crusts. The imagery is unmistakably ancient, families racing against time in makeshift arks while entire continents shatter and sink beneath digital waves. These stories tap directly into our contemporary anxieties, swapping angry gods for climate change or uncontrollable technology. The cause of the apocalypse may be updated, but the core emotional journey remains unchanged. The terror of annihilation, the desperate scramble for sanctuary, and the fragile hope for a new beginning on the other side. Darren Aronofsky's film Noah takes this synthesis even further, weaving together the threads of Genesis with modern environmental angst and psychological turmoil. His Noah is not a simple patriarch, but a man tormented by visions of ecological devastation, interpreting his divine mission as a command to let sinful humanity perish. This interpretation frames the flood as a direct consequence of humanity's pillaging of the natural world, a stark warning for the Anthropocene era. The film wrestles with the moral horror of the story, asking what kind of person could be chosen to witness the end of everything, and what kind of world could possibly be worth such a price. These modern retellings, from the quiet to the catastrophic, confirm that the flood myth is far more than a relic. It is a living, adaptable framework through which we process our deepest fears about our own power, the stability of our world, and our capacity for either destruction or grace. The waters continue to rise on our screens and pages because they mirror the tides of uncertainty within us, always asking the same eternal question: What will we save when everything else is washed away? Water itself holds the key to this ancient story's power. In every legend, from the raging tempest to the gentle rain, water is the agent of change, a substance of profound and contradictory meaning. It is the ultimate bringer of both death and life. As a destructive force, water embodies pure chaos. It has no respect for the order humanity builds, washing away cities, erasing borders, and drowning the familiar in a terrifying, formless void. It represents the unknown depths of the ocean and the hidden currents of our own unconscious minds, the parts of ourselves we cannot control. Yet in the very same moment, this destructive power is what makes water the ultimate purifier. It washes away moral corruption, spiritual stagnation, and the accumulated failures of the old world. Think of the simple, universal act of washing your hands, the water carrying away the grime of the day. The flood myth magnifies this simple act to a cosmic scale. The world's sins are not just wiped clean, they are utterly dissolved, leaving behind a blank, muddy slate. And from that fertile sludge, life begins again. Water is not only about endings, it is the essential ingredient for every beginning. It is the amniotic fluid of the planet, the source of all fertility and growth. A flood, therefore, is the perfect, terrifyingly beautiful symbol for this complete cycle. It is the universe's way of hitting the ultimate reset button, using the same element to destroy and to give birth, to end one story and write the first page of the next. This is why cultures separated by continents and millennia all arrived at the same elemental conclusion. The cleansing of the world required not fire, not wind, but water, the one force that could simultaneously punish and promise, erase and create. This figure at the heart of the deluge is always the same, yet constantly transforming. The survivor archetype, from Utnapishtim to Noah, represents a singular thread of continuity in a broken world. Their defining characteristic is often not strength, but a specific kind of receptivity. They are chosen because they listen. A whisper through a reed wall, a direct command from God, a plea from a small fish. These heroes hear the warning that others miss. Their primary virtue in the oldest stories is pious obedience, a passive acceptance of a divine blueprint for salvation. They do not design the ark, they follow its divinely provided specifications to the letter. Their heroism lies in their faith and their role as a vessel, both literally and spiritually, for the future. Yet this passive model is not the only one. A dramatic shift occurs with Yu the Great in China. Here, the survivor is not a man waiting for instructions, but a man writing them. He does not escape the water, he confronts it. His virtue is not passive piety, but active, relentless perseverance. His heroism is measured in calloused hands and a weary body, in the sheer human will to reshape a hostile world. He is not saved from the catastrophe, he saves his people from within it, using ingenuity and governance to wrest order from chaos. This fundamental difference reveals a fork in the road of human values. One path trusts in divine selection and obedience, the other in human effort and moral fortitude. Our modern retellings of the flood have overwhelmingly chosen the second path. Today, our ark builders are scientists deciphering climatic warnings, leaders rallying communities, or ordinary everymen relying on courage and resilience. The divine warning has been replaced by a satellite image, the sacred blueprint by an engineering schematic. This evolution of the hero reflects our own changing psyche. We have increasingly placed our faith not in gods who will save the righteous, but in our own capacity to understand, adapt, and overcome. The flood remains the same absolute catastrophe, but our imagined savior has transformed from a pious listener to a proactive problem solver. This tells a profound story about our growing belief in human agency, even in the shadow of annihilation. It raises a haunting question about our own potential crisis. not which of us is the most righteous, but which of us has the knowledge and the will to build the next ark. The relentless waters always recede, leaving behind not just mud and ruin, but the undeniable promise of a new start. At its core, the global flood narrative is humanity's oldest and most profound story of hope. It is a declaration that even after the most absolute devastation, life can and will begin again. This is not a naive optimism, but a hard-won conviction born from the deepest wells of our collective memory. The story gives us a way to confront the terrifying realities of death, decay, and total disaster without being completely paralyzed by despair. It teaches a difficult but essential truth, that destruction is often the necessary precursor to creation, that every true ending contains the seed of a new beginning. This psychological function is vital. By mythologizing the cycle of catastrophe and renewal, we give ourselves a framework to process loss on a grand scale. The flood washes away a world that has become corrupt, stagnant, or simply too broken to continue, making space for something fresh and untainted to grow. This ancient message resonates with a startling urgency in our own time. As we face the very real and growing threats of climate change and ecological crisis, the flood myth offers a powerful lens through which to view our predicament. It reframes a potential catastrophe not as a final, meaningless end, but as a difficult and painful transition. It speaks of a necessary cleansing, a purification of a system that has become poisoned by its own excess. More importantly, it places the responsibility for the future squarely in our hands. The story of the Ark is not just about surviving the storm. It is about what we choose to save, what we carry forward into the new world. The hope embedded in these legends is not passive, it is a call to action. It is the imperative to build a better, more conscious future from the lessons of the past, to become the architects of our own renewal before the waters are upon us. Yet the world's memory is not a monolith. For all the flood's overwhelming presence, some of humanity's oldest voices tell a different story. Along the Nile, ancient Egypt's cosmology was shaped by the river's own reliable, life-giving rhythm of flood and retreat. Their primary creation story begins with the receding of the primordial waters of Nun, revealing the first mound of dry land. This was not a destructive deluge sent to punish humanity, but a gentle, perpetual withdrawal that made life possible. Water was the source of existence, not its destroyer. Their existential threats lay elsewhere, in the nightly battle of the sun god Ra against the serpent of chaos, Apep, a danger figured as eternal darkness, not endless water. Similarly, in the vast frozen expanses of Siberia, many indigenous traditions center their cataclysms on fire and ice, elements that defined their harsh reality. A world-ending conflagration or an eternal, deep freeze was a far more tangible terror than a flood. Some Native American tribes of the arid Southwest also tell of worlds destroyed by fire or collapsed by their own moral decay, with no great ark required. The absence of a flood myth in these cultures is not a hole in the global pattern, but a crucial part of it. It reveals that our foundational stories are not just inherited from a single, forgotten event, but are also forged in the specific crucible of our environment. A people of the desert will fear drought above all else, while a people of the frozen north will dread the unending winter. These counter-narratives enrich our understanding, showing that humanity's collective psyche holds many archetypes of renewal. The flood is the most common, a haunting melody played across most of the world, but it is not the only song. This profound diversity forces a final, unifying question, one that looks past the water and the fire and the ice to the shared human need that created them all. These stories are the bedrock beneath our feet, the deep cultural strata upon which so much of human civilization has been built. The flood narrative is not an isolated myth. it is a foundational force that has actively shaped religious doctrines, legal systems, and artistic expression for thousands of years. In Judaism and Christianity, the story of Noah established the concept of a divine covenant, a binding promise between God and humanity that forms the very basis of a relational faith, sealed with the rainbow in the clouds. In Hinduism, the tale of Manu reinforces the concept of cyclical time, where the universe undergoes repeated periods of dissolution and rebirth, a philosophy that structures an entire worldview. These legends were used to explain the origins of a people, like the Inca who traced their divine right to rule back to the survivors of Yunu Pachacuti. They validated social structures, often positioning the ruling class as the direct descendants of those chosen to survive the primordial cleansing. More than anything, these stories became powerful vessels for moral instruction. They encoded essential lessons about the dangers of hubris, the virtue of obedience to divine or natural law, and the critical importance of compassion and environmental stewardship, as seen in Manu's kindness to the small fish. They answered the most profound questions a culture could ask. Where did we come from? Why is the world the way it is? What does the power that shaped the universe expect from us? The sheer endurance of these tales across continents and centuries is a testament to their unmatched power. They are not simple fairy tales forgotten with childhood. They are the pillars of our collective psyche, the stories we built our world upon, because they so perfectly articulate our deepest fear of annihilation and our most resilient hope for a clean slate. From the clay tablets of Sumer to the oral traditions of the Australian outback, this single story of a great flood connects us all. It is a narrative that has transcended geography and language, binding humanity with a common memory of catastrophe and the profound hope for a second chance. We have followed its recurring themes: the divine discontent that brings the waters, the chosen survivor who heeds a warning, the carefully built vessel of salvation, and the final, fragile promise of a new covenant. We have traced its potential footprints in the rising seas of a post-Ice Age world and in the sudden, terrifying deluge that filled the Black Sea basin. We have even peered into the depths of our own minds, where this story lives as a powerful archetype, a blueprint for the soul's own journey through crisis and rebirth. This is far more than a simple collection of ancient tales. It is a foundational chapter in the story of us, a shared inheritance that gives voice to our most primal fear of being utterly erased and our most resilient belief that from the mud of total loss, something better can emerge. As we navigate our own era of uncertainty and environmental change, the wisdom of these legends feels more urgent than ever. They do not offer a promise of easy salvation, but a profound reminder that renewal is always a possibility, born from the choices we make about what to save and what to leave behind. Thank you for joining this exploration of humanity's oldest story. If this journey into our collective past has sparked new thoughts, we would love to hear them in the comments below. And for more deep dives into the mysteries that shape our world, be sure to subscribe.